Oh, there you go.
Go ahead and begin. Yeah.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming and at least sticking around for my talk. My name is Tyler Hudack. I'm here to present the case of the crappy Crypter. This is something that I worked on about a month ago. I thought it was kind of interesting and just kind of get into it. But just for my benefit, how many people here have ever done anything with reverse engineering or malware analysis? Okay, so then good. Some of this information should be new then. This is the standard disclaimer slide. The information and opinions expressed here are solely my own and do not express the views or opinions of my employer. Required to put that in. So, like I said, my name is Tyler Hudack. I am the team lead for the Security Operations Center for a medical institution. I've been working in InfoSec for about 19 years. There's my contact information. I know, trust me, it's a long time. My contact information, it's in, again, later in the slides if you guys have any questions or anything like that. So I'm going to tell a story about something that happened a little while ago, like I said, about a month ago, and how I went through and analyzed it, and how and the techniques that I used. A lot of these techniques can be used for other things as well. If you get a piece of malware, or you're trying to break some simple encryption, or analyze the network traffic, or something like that, a lot of these techniques you can use for that. But before I get into that, I want to kind of make sure that we're all on the same level in regards to some terms. So, how many people here know what a packer is? Oh, some of you. So a packer is a program that's going to reduce the size of an executable through compression. The reason that packers do this, or the reason that they exist, is way back in the early networking days when you had 10 base T networks or 100 base T networks, and the amount of traffic going over the network was limited. If you had to transfer an executable that was normally 100K, it took a lot longer than an executable that was only 10K. And so that's why packers came into existence. They reduced the executable size while still maintaining the integrity of the executable. It will still function the same way. And in fact, the decompression of the executable is minimal. You won't notice it when you execute it. But one of the side effects of packers is that the internals of the executable become hidden. So if there are any embedded strings in there, like URLs or usernames or passwords or anything like that, those kind of become compressed and hidden as well. Any of the imports, the API imports that the executable will use that as an analyst would be interesting to know about, those become hidden as well. So attackers like to use these. And there have actually been a lot of malicious hackers come into existence that have a lot of anti-forensics and anti-analysis code in them. So that the packers actually check, are you running a debugger? Are you in a VM? Do you have Process Explorer running in the background? Is your host name Sandbox? Things like that, to kind of prevent you from being able to analyze the malicious code that's buried underneath. Well, there's a subset of packers called crypters, and these are essentially the same thing as packers, except that they use encryption to hide the original executable. These are more used for more malicious code. You see them more in malware use than anything else, but they're going to use encryption like RC4 or AES, something like that, to encrypt the executable as opposed to just compressing it. And finally, FUD. I'm sure we've all heard the term FUD, but it actually has two meanings. In the case that I'm talking about here, it's used a lot on hacker forums to mean fully undetectable. And what that means is you could take this, if I give you a packer that creates something that's FUD, fully undetectable, it means that at the output of that packer, you can upload it to VirusTroll and nobody will see it. Nobody, even if this is a common virus like ICAR or Zeus or some CryptoLocker or something like that, put it through the packer, it becomes FUD. You upload it to VirusTotal or some other website, and it's not going to be able to be detected. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about XOR. How many people here know what XOR is? Cool, that's great. So I'll just kind of go over briefly, but basically it's just a logical operation. It's used a lot during encryption. It's actually used a lot within encryption algorithms, but a lot of times attackers will use XOR just to kind of obfuscate strings or code like that, because it's very fast, it's very easy to use. This is just kind of some pseudocode around how an XOR operation would work. You have a key up here, you have the string you want to obfuscate, and then you just XOR that key over each letter in the string. And something comes out, the crap that spits out on the other end is totally different, and so it's obfuscated. The nice thing about XOR, if you take that obfuscated string and then XOR it by the key again, you get the original stuff back out. So it's very fast and very easy to use. And keys don't have to be one byte. You can have multi-byte keys. One of the interesting things about XOR, though, is if you XOR anything by 0, you get self out. So A XORed by 0 equals A. And you can actually use this to your advantage, and we'll see how we can use that to our advantage later. All right, so once upon a time. So in theory, since I'm on video, I was sitting in at work, or somebody was sitting at work, and heard that in the malware sandbox there was some malware that wasn't executing, which, as a malware analyst, this kind of perks up that person's ears. If something's not executing in the sandbox, it means that there's some anti-analysis code or there's some anti-sandbox code, which makes it more interesting. So that person wants to go and look at it. So went and looked at it, and it turned out that what the analyst was trying to execute was this 1.1 megabyte text file that looked like this. Kind of went back to the main character of our story, went back to that analyst and said, hey, you were executing a text file. Is that what you wanted to execute? And it turns out that yes, that this was a something.exe that was attached to some fish somewhere that came in, and they wanted to see what they wanted to analyze the malware, but it turns out that it was just this huge long text file, which is kind of interesting in itself. Does that mean that the attacker kind of messed up or performing some weird obfuscation? But you start to look at this, and there's two things in this that kind of jump out to begin with. The first here is this little header that says at boson crypter underscore HF and then another at sign, another at symbol. This is a pretty good signature that you could go and Google and figure out what it was. But the more interesting thing at the time, though, was this huge, long, over 1 megabyte list of hexadecimal characters. And again, this is exactly how it came in, as a text file with an exe extension. So that's why it didn't execute in the sandbox, is because it didn't have that exe. It wasn't an actual executable. So whenever you see something like this, you see 0x and then a whole bunch of hex characters, that's usually the ASCII representation of some binary. Like 6D here, this is 1 byte, 7E is another byte, 7A, C5, C3, and so on. It's usually bytes, some binary bytes. And you can kind of tell that this is an ASCII, the hex representation of ASCII, because these aren't ASCII codes. They're too high. Actually, I think these couple are, but when you get to like C5, C3, those are too high in the ASCII table. If you go and look at like what the hex representation of A is, I think it's like 65 or something like that. Once you guys start getting into the C's and that's too high. So now we know we're definitely dealing with binary. So one of the first things that we want to do is try to figure out what this is. See if we can figure it out just by looking at it. So just looking at this hex, you kind of can't tell what it is. If this was, the first thing that I would look for is these first 2 bytes, the 67E. And I would look to see if they were 4D5A. Anybody know what 4D5A represents? It's the ASCII of MZ, capital MZ.
It's the PE.
Right. It's the beginning of a Windows executable, the PE format. Every Windows executable or modern Windows executable starts with the letters MZ. So that's 4D5A. So we know that this isn't a executable, or at least based off of this, because it doesn't start with 4D5A. It starts with something else. We know the next thing I would look for is if it was base 64 encoded, because a lot of times attackers will base 64 encode things, but it's not. Does anybody know why this is not base 64 encoded? Anyone? Right. because all we're seeing here are hexadecimal characters, 0 through 9 and A through F. The character set for base 64 is the entire alphabet, upper and lowercase, the plus, forward slash, and then equal sign. We're not seeing any of those other characters. We're only seeing hex digits here. So we know this is a base 64. So far, it just looks like this is just a bunch of random, binary or ASCII representation of binary characters. I would start to also look for patterns. Maybe there's a pattern in here which could help us figure out, maybe it's encrypted, things like that. And I'll spare you the time of looking through all these characters. There's really no patterns in here at all, or any other clues as to how it was encoded. So just going through all of this in my mind, or looking at it, looking for file signatures, looking for any patterns in this whole big block, we don't find anything. So unfortunately, that doesn't get us anywhere. So the next thing that I would do is just kind of strip all this out, strip out this header, and there's actually a footer at the bottom too, just so all we have are these hexadecimal characters, and then convert it to binary. There are lots of ways that you can convert hexadecimal characters like that to binary. This is the way that I do it. It's just a Perl one-liner, which takes every 2 characters and converts it to a binary character and spits it out. And then you can run a lot of different tools on it. Unix and Linux comes with a tool by default called file. And what this does is it compares the headers of the file you're giving it to a number of different signatures it has and tells you if it knows what it is. So if this was actually a Windows executable, it would have come out and said that this is a Windows executable. If it was a Word document, it would have said, Office document, or if it was a text file, it would have told it to be text. In this case, this says ran it against it, and unfortunately all it said was data. So in looking at it in a hex dump, we see that, the binary conversion did work, but we're still just seeing all this binary crap. So unfortunately at this time, didn't quite know what all of this was. The first couple steps that I did didn't work. So then you go through and you look for patterns. Some of this stuff I'm going to try to do live, see if it actually works. Can everybody see the stuff I'm typing? Okay. All right. So here we've got the original malware, and here's the ASCII format. I had converted it over to binary, so just so you can see that I am dealing with it. So here we've got the original, the stuff converted from ASCII to binary. So like I did before, I run file against it. Unfortunately, it doesn't find anything. So the next thing that I'm going to run is try to find, to see if I can find anything that could be encoded within it. Like I said, one of the ways that malware or attackers will encode things is with XOR, and because it's very simple to do. And so if you can go and you can find XOR encoded strings within here, within the binary that you're looking at, or whatever data blob you're looking at, you could figure out what the key that it was XOR encrypted. You can do this by hand, which is not fun. But fortunately, there's a tool out there called XOR Search. Has anybody used XOR Search before? Cool. This is a free tool written by a guy named Didier Stevens at didierstevens.com. He has a whole crap load of really cool tools out there. But what this particular tool does is, I always forget how to do this. You give it the file that you want to run against, and then you give it a string that you want to look for. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through that file with that string and encode that string any number of ways that it can think of. It's going to try XOR encoding using single byte keys, so 0 through 255 is going to XOR encode that string and then look for that data, that blob of encoded data within here somewhere, or within that file. It's going to do ROC13 encoding, which people actually use still, and then a couple of other different types of encoding techniques. So what you do with XOR Search is you give it the file that you're going to run it against, then you give it a word that you think may be in the file. So let's take a step back for a second and think about what we're dealing with here, because we're going to use that to figure out what we're going to look for. So if you remember, this came in as pretending to be an executable, okay? So we're going to want to think about things that would be in an executable, what strings would be in an executable, and then search for those, or at least common things that would be in it. So does anybody know any common strings that you would find within a Windows executable?
Main.
Main, like M-A-I-N?
Yeah.
That could kernel 32, yeah.
Can't be run.
So we'll try main. Nothing. Kernel 32 is a great one because that's kernel32.dll is loaded into every single executable by default. So it doesn't find anything. Another one that I would look for, and by default these searches aren't case sensitive. You can turn, they are case sensitive. You can turn off case sensitivity, or however you pronounce that. But then it takes forever to run. But looking for the word this with a capital T is something that I would always recommend looking for. Anybody know why?
I forget the exact string, but it says like this program cannot be run in DOS.
Right. Every Windows executable has some, in the very beginning, it has something that says something like, this program cannot be run in DOS, or this program must be run in Win32. There are a couple variations of that string, but it always begins with the word this with a capital T. So you run that, and nothing. So unfortunately, either our data blob right here, our encoded stuff, is either not XOR encoded, or it's not XOR encoded with a key that XOR search can brute force. XOR search, I think, can only do single byte keys. You can technically very easily write a script that would brute force like 2 to 4 byte keys, but after that it kind of becomes too computationally difficult to do it on a computer, at least with the stuff that I have. One thing that I'll note before I move on, I would not recommend searching for www XOR search. Does anybody know why? In any data that you have, at some point you're going to have 3 bytes right next to each other that are the same. Either all zeros or all ones or something. And when that happens, at some point, it's going to be XOR encoded to be www. So, of course, it's probably not going to work with this. Yeah, it's cool. So, I search for it. We just happen at these locations to have 3 bytes that are the same, that when XORed with this value, 9A, turn out to be www. I mean, it's very easy to tell that we're not actually dealing with URLs here, because then we'd see www.com. But I don't recommend searching for www. Any questions so far? Am I going at a good pace? All right. Okay, so search for any obvious pattern. Originally we didn't see any obvious patterns. Thought it might be XOR encoded, so we used XOR search, and unfortunately didn't find it. That doesn't mean it's not XOR encoded. It just means that it's not XOR encoded in a way that XOR search can find. But so far we're not finding any results, so at this point in time, tried to figure out what to do, and I decided to go back and ask the Oracle tool. I went back and I Googled boson Crypter, which probably should have done in the first place, but it's kind of one of those things where you start doing this and you see this, and yeah, I could Google that, but it's always more fun to try to figure it out on my own. But I went and just kind of gave up and Googled it, and this is what I found. So there's this website out there called artiekings.com, which is filled with a bunch of people writing malware, and there's this guy who posted this. Boson Crypter. Can I see down here? Boson Crypter is a free FUD crypter with updates, meaning it's fully undetectable. It can encrypt native and .NET files. It auto updates. It has RC4 encryption. So if it truly does have RC4 encryption, which is real encryption, then that would be why we would be able to kind of XOR search and find anything in it, because it's actually using regular encryption or real encryption. And of course, it goes on doing all those other things, bypass all antivirus, bypass firewalls, and you can download it from this link. And so I did. So at this point, though, I kind of get interested, because if it says that it's using RC4 encryption, this is actual encryption. But RC4 encryption is kind of interesting because RC4 encryption is a symmetric key algorithm. In other words, it uses a shared key. It has a password that's used to encrypt the data. So what that means, and this is what the interface looks like of this crypter. Right? There's no options. There's no anything you can do. You can basically open up a file with it and then encrypt it. So there's no place for you to store passwords. So what does that mean? Right, it's using a hard-coded password. So that means that if it's actually using RC4, and we can figure out what the password is, then we can decrypt that blob that we originally had and get to that end executable, which is really what we want to do. It's what we're trying to do. So I've analyzed a lot of malware. And I've seen a lot of malware that uses RC4 encryption. And I would say at least 3/4 of the time, they're using code that looks like this. So Microsoft APIs, their DLLs, they have built-in APIs to the operating system to do RC4 encryption. In fact, this is how you do it. This is from the MSDN page. And 75% of the time, this is exactly what it looks like in the malware. Like they went out to the MSDN page and copied and pasted, and that's probably what they did. So because of that, if we can look at the executable, in this case the Crypter, and see where it calls these APIs, encrypt, create hash, crypt hash data, derive key, encrypt, and so on, then we can do some reverse engineering and figure out what the password is. Because the way that this works is it creates some handle to some hash thing, and then it actually creates a hash of the password. The password you give it creates usually an MD5 hash of the password, and then uses that hash to derive a RC4 key, and then it encrypts it with the key. So all we have to do is figure out what this right here is, this password, and then we can write our own C++ code or whatever scripting language you want to use to decrypt it. So this is what we're after right now. We're looking for what this password is. All these APIs are stored in a DLL called advapping32.dll. And don't get me wrong, there are other ways to do this. This isn't the only way, but 75% of the time, this is how the attackers are doing it. They're just copying and pasting from the MSD. So because of this, now we want to figure out how do we find this password. And so there are a couple things that we can do. Let me just do it. So. So here we've got the Boson Crypter free executable. This is the executable that I downloaded. One of the things that we can do is look for those APIs, those cryptographic APIs, by looking at the import table. And if you don't know what that is, every Windows executable has what's called an import table, or an import address table. And what this is a list of all the DLLs and APIs that it's going to load from the Windows operating system. And when that program gets loaded into memory, all the names of the APIs are replaced with the memory addresses of those functions, so that the program knows where to jump to all this. The nice thing about this is they're stored as strings within the binary. So if we can either pull out the API table or the import address table and look for those crypto APIs, we know that yes, it is actually using these. So what I mean by that is, I know I just went through that really fast. So I'm using a tool here, excuse me, I'm using a tool here called PE check. All this does is it's a Python script which just goes through an executable and just dumps out the entire PE format into text so that we can go in and look at it. Don't worry if you don't know what the hell I just said. I'll just kind of go through it. All right, so all this stuff we don't care about. This is all the PE header. Down to the import address table. All right, so here we start seeing some things importing. We see some WinSock32 DLLs being loaded, or some APIs. The interesting thing about WinSock32.dll, well, let me take a step back. APIs can be loaded or specified in the import address table by either the name of the API or it's called by the port number. In other words, what function number is it within that DLL? For some reason, WSOC32 always imports as by order. I don't know why it does that. But so we know that it's loading stuff from wstop32.dll. So we know that this Crypter has networking capabilities. So it has the ability to communicate over the network, which is kind of interesting. Going down a little bit farther is version.dll. Let me see if I can. All right, so here we got kernel32.dll. You see that it's importing sleep, a bunch of other stuff, write process memory, read process memory, create file, a bunch of other stuff. Let me get to add-bappy32, which is where the crypto stuff is. 32. There you go. So add-bappy32. So we could go through all of these and figure out if it's grabbing any of those crypto APIs, which it doesn't look like it, but just the heck of it. I'm just going to see if I can grep them. And it goes through, and the Crypter doesn't seem to be importing any of those crypto APIs, which is kind of interesting. It says it does RC4 encryption, and don't get me wrong, there are ways to dynamically load the APIs during runtime instead of specifying them beforehand, which you could be doing that. But it's just kind of odd that it's not showing those. So the next step that I would do. So does everybody understand what I mean by this? That it's not showing up in the crypto APIs, the DLL, the crypto APIs, the functions that are used to create the encryption, the RC4 encryption, do not show like they're being loaded by the executable.
Well, for that type of application, why wouldn't you just do the standard?
Exactly. That's kind of what I'm driving to. Why wouldn't so are you saying why wouldn't it just load it up like
I'm trying
normal?
to hide them loading on RC4, I can see doing a dynamic way,
Right.
but the problem with my app is when you just encrypt the file.
Right, exactly, and that's kind of what made it a little bit curious to me. It says that it does RC4 encryption, so it's not a surprise that it's doing it. But it doesn't seem to be loading the required functions to do the actual RC4 encryption. So that means either it's hiding that it's doing it for some reason, which could be some anti-reversing stuff, that the reason it's doing this. Or it doesn't actually do that, or they wrote their own encryption code, which, as we all know, is very, very bad to do. So any of these could have been possible, but it was still just kind of odd that we weren't seeing this. Did that kind of answer your question? So we didn't see that. So the next thing that you typically look for is when you're doing this type of thing is look at the embedded strings within the executable itself, because that will give you a lot of information as to what it does. And you can go through there and you can then look for other crypto strings. Maybe it's calling some other weird function that you didn't anticipate, or maybe it's in its path itself, or something like that. But I ran through it. I ran strings against this, and this kind of popped out. There was one string that says this is a compiled AutoIt script, and then AutoIt v3. Does anybody know what AutoIt is? Right. It's a basic scripting language that's used to automate Windows GUI and general scripting. So in other words, it's basic for Windows. But granted, AutoIt is a very cool language to learn, because you can basically automate GUI programs with it. And at least in this case, it looks like the attacker wrote their Crypter in AutoIt. Now there are a couple of interesting things about AutoIt. First, AutoIt compiled scripts are compiled scripts. That means that we can decompile them. We can technically take it back to the original source code. Think of them as if you ever had a compiled Python script. You run Python, then usually you'll see another file appear, the name of the script .pyc. That's the compiled Python script. The same concept here. They just took this AutoIt script and compiled it into an executable, so that you don't need to have the AutoIt interpreter there to run it. So what that means is we can take that AutoIt compiled script and decompile it back to the original source code. The same way that you can do with something like a .NET program. You can, decompile a .NET program back to the original source code. Do the same thing with AutoIt. which is great for us because that means what we can do is take that decompiled code and see exactly what the attacker wrote, see exactly how they're doing it. Now, the only program that I know of to do this is called exe to AUT. I have it right here. And here's the boson crypt free. And all you do is you just drag this out of here. Yeah. And then it goes through and look, it decompiled it for us. This is the actual code. A couple things about exe to AUT though. It's hard to find. You kind of have to go on some not so nice sites on the internet, and so be careful where you go to download it. And it doesn't always work. It only works to a certain version of AutoIt, and after that the results are either unreliable or they just don't have it at all. But this is what you get out. You get the source code. And at the top here, it's all right. It's just a bunch of global constants, and then we start getting into all of this type of code. It's probably hard to see. Probably hard to see, but basically is a bunch of obfuscated code. And I can tell you from experience that if somebody didn't obfuscate their code, it actually does come back with the actual variable names and actual code that somebody wrote. So AutoIt works, but now we've got all of this code here to kind of go through. So the problem with this is, and don't get me wrong, this is what kind of comes out. You can go through and you can deobfuscate it, go through and figure out what PKA 800620 actually is, what that variable means, and go through and do a copy and replace. But I'll tell you from my experience, whenever I see something like this is my reaction. I am not going to do this. If you can do it, it's going to take you a long time to do. So at this point, it's kind of almost to the point of giving up. There's only so much you can do, and this was more of a side project to kind of figure out if I could do this. I didn't want to go through the process of actually deobfuscating it. I actually tried for about 5 minutes, and then decided I would rather poke my eyes out. And so started thinking, all right, what else can we do? Well, there are other ways that you can find the key. You can load up the boson crypter into a disassembler like IDAPRO, and kind of reverse engineer the program that way. Or you can load it up into a debugger and step through and see if you can come across the API call that actually makes the crypto, and then crypto calls and pull the key out that way. But it's a lot of work, and when you're dealing with a AutoIt compiled program, it gets very messy because the actual code that you're looking at is not the actual code that the author wrote. It's the AutoIt compiler and how it's interpreting all of the bytecodes from the AutoIt program. And so it becomes very messy. So decided not to go down this route because it would probably be easier to deobfuscate that code. But then I started thinking, if only there was a way to monitor the APIs that were called by the program. Anybody ever done this? Cool, so this is going to be new stuff. There are lots of programs that allow you to do this. One of the more popular ones is one called Process Monitor from sysinternals, written by Mark Rosinovich, I think. Brilliant guy who sold his company to Microsoft, now works with them and makes millions of dollars, I'm sure. But Process Monitor is really good. It doesn't actually monitor the actual APIs. It monitors them at a different level so you don't get the actual APIs called. The best program that I can tell you to do this, use for this, is called API Monitor. It's a couple years old, but it will actually go in and monitor every single API that you want it to monitor from a program that's called. So let me show you how this is done. Am I doing okay on time? Yeah. Cool. So just so you know, I'm going to try a live demo. These typically fail, so I actually have a movie, and if that doesn't work, it's going to basically be me standing here and looking up. So, all right. So. All right, so just a couple quick warnings. Whenever you're analyzing any type of malware, obviously don't do it on your actual machine. I'm working in a virtual machine here. Make sure you're in host-only networking mode. You're not connected out to the internet or your corporate network, and so on. And if you're using a VM like I am, make sure you take a snapshot beforehand, so if you need to reset really quickly, you can.
How do you get the files in and out at that point? What's the safest way you found to do that?
That's never an easy question to answer. The way that I typically do it is shared folders between the host and the guest. That's relatively safe. Usually what I'll do is it's in host-only networking mode, and I will set up a shared folder that's read-only. So it's granted, it's easier to get things in to the guest. If you want to get things out, you're going to have to set up a full access shared folder. But my only caveat to that is don't do it on like your root directory or your home directory. That's something that, you know, let's say you're analyzing Crypter launcher and all of a sudden you encrypted your host system.
I always just burn it to an ISO.
That's another way. Yeah, just burn the thing to a virtual or an ISO on your disk and mount it that way. Some of the tools like VirtualBox and VMware, you can drag and drop between the two. Kind of got to be careful with that because that's how a lot of malware will detect that it's in a VM. And if it's in a VM and it detects that, it may not act the way that it does. So, API Monitor. All right, so API Monitor is a really cool program. It comes in 32-bit and 64-bit modes, and it all depends on which version. The version that you use is based on the program that you're analyzing. So if you're analyzing a 32-bit program, even though you're on a 64-bit system, you're going to want to use the 32-bit version of API Monitor.
Yes, hopefully this is not a dumb question, but do you have the code, or are you not sure how you tell it's 32?
API Monitor will yell at you if you try to analyze it and it's not. If you don't want to do that, if you use a tool like PE check that kind of parses out the header, there's a flag in there which tells it if it's 32 or 64. Those are the two ways that you can pop it. But this is kind of what it looks like in the beginning. I'm going to close some of these tabs just so we have some more room. So the first thing you want to do with API Monitor is choose the APIs that you want to monitor. The nice thing is, you know, it by default will monitor about 10 to 20,000 different APIs. I wouldn't recommend monitoring them all. You'll kill your system. But in this case, we want to monitor the encryption ones. And so I go to AdVAP32 and they nicely categorize everything for you. And so here we have all the crypto ones, so I'm just going to tell it monitor all the crypto APIs. Cool. Then, because I saw some, sorry, the mouse on this laptop is not. Because we saw some networking stuff, APIs being loaded, and I'm curious what that is. I'm going to try to tell it to monitor the networking APIs. No, this is just a crappy little laptop. All right, maybe I will. You may be going back to the. So I'm just going to tell it to do the WinSock stuff. There. All right. All right, you know what? Yeah. I can get out of. And now it's working. All right, so we got it. One of the things that I forgot to do, you usually want to run this as administrator. Because if you don't, it could start, you may not be able to see everything. So I recommend doing that. To do that, you just click on this little shield up here. It's nice enough that it remembers everything that you did. And then when you're ready, you just click Monitor New Process. You select the one that you want to monitor. It will start recording itself. It actually works. I'm going to tell it to monitor goes on Crypter, and you're going to see it pop up. It's also written so that if any new processes pop up, it says, "Do you want to monitor these?" And if the parent of that process is your malware or the thing that you're monitoring, yeah, you want to monitor it because it's calling something else. If it's not, then you can usually skip it. So, but what this is going to do before I click OK, we're telling it to launch our Crypter. And it's going to start looking for any time it calls any of these functions that we marked. So I click OK, and there you can see it running. And over here, on the right-hand side, you can see that it's actually already started to record some of those APIs that we told it to monitor. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it, let's encrypt the notepad. Encrypt. So it's going through and doing its encryption. We have another process. Doesn't seem to be related, so I'm just going to tell it skip. Where do we want to put our output? This is from our Crypter still. I'm just going to call it notepad. Crypt. All right, and then it's done. I'm just going to pause everything so we don't get hold up. So here, these are all the different functions that we told it to monitor that it saw our Crypter running. And we can see that it actually did call some encryption functions. Here we have crypt acquire context, and when you click on it, you can actually see at the bottom all the parameters that were called to this. So if we do see it, the call where it creates the hash with the password in it, we're going to see the password down. It was really nice to be able to do. This is really great if you're doing a pen test on an application and it uses SSL and you can't get into that SSL layer, but you want to see what it's sending. Use something like this to see what it's sending out. And you can actually debug. Another thing you can do is you can set it to breakpoint on those functions. So let's say you're sending something over SSL and you wanted to insert some characters into that for like SQL injection. How you do it. But going down, we see that a couple other things. We see it calling cryptGenRandom, which if you look up that function on MSDN, it just generates a bunch of random data. This system function 36, I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up, but it's actually cryptGenRandom. And so we're going down, and that's all we're seeing it calling. Then we start seeing some the networking calls, which was kind of interesting because we didn't ask it to go out and check anything on the network, but it was trying to.
Updates.
Could be updates. This is where it was going. Could be updates. Not entirely sure. But then, it comes to the bottom, and after we killed the program. Notice it did not call any of those cryptographic functions. In fact, it didn't call any other cryptographic functions, which would be required, or which would probably be required. Of course, we could have missed some. We didn't, click every cryptographic function in the Windows API. But, the fact that we didn't see it, would now start leading me to believe maybe it's not actually doing RC4 encryption, or if it is, it's doing it on its own, which probably is a little bit difficult to do within Autowit. I'm gonna say. I don't know if you've ever programmed in BASIC, but there's a reason it's called BASIC. So at this point, we're not seeing the actual function calls for encryption. And we see it reach out to the site. Is this a possible backdoor port? It did say that it does updates. In my experience, usually if something doesn't update, you can usually turn that off. But the fact that it's going to a site name like this, I don't know. And the fact that we're dealing with malware, because let's face it, you're dealing with malware. The guys writing it are not the most ethical in the world. So I've seen many times where it says it's doing an update where in fact it's downloading backdoor language. I didn't actually go in and see what it was going to be downloading from this. That would probably be my next step. But because I was trying to break the encryption. So now what? The amount of work that was needed at this point in time versus the reward was low. We weren't getting hit with a ton of these. Didn't know, if we'd ever see one again. I was just kind of playing around with it. And so the next step normally would be to actually go in and open it up in an IDA Pro or some other debugger and try to figure it out that way, what it was doing. But then I actually looked at the output. I had actually, when I ran API Monitor originally, I actually did look at, I actually did throw a notepad to encrypt Notepad, and I wanted to see the output of it because I didn't know if the Crypter would actually generate an executable, and what we received in the email was just like a coincidence, or the attacker messed up or something like that. But the output from the Crypter is that text file. In fact, let me show you. So we just did that. Here's the Notepad crypt. And it when it says created was a executable, is in fact that huge text file. So what this means is whoever sent that original fish didn't even bother to look at what they had generated. They actually just assumed that it was correct and just sent this huge text file.
This is not run.
No, this is a text file. If we send does it have an executable? So let me put an exe extension on it so Windows will try to run it. And then it just dies. Nothing happens because it's all a text file. Which is kind of interesting, but what's even more interesting is when you take the output from Notepad and compare it to the original program, the original binary that we received. And all of the red stuff up here are characters that are the same between the two. These are two different executables that were encrypted with the same program. So based off what you're seeing here, what does this mean?
Some sort of decoding stuff?
Right. It's not actually doing real encryption. It's not actually doing RC4. And the reason we know that is if it was actually doing RC4, none of these characters would be the same. Because real encryption like RC4 generates data that looks random. And so you put in two of the same or two similar files in there, it shouldn't generate the same header or anything like that. So here we've got two separate files that were encrypted by this program that have a lot of the same things. So it's not actually using encryption. It's probably using some encoding algorithm. It's probably, it could also be, that it's really using XOR. So I generated a new theory that it was really using XOR with some static key because, and the reason I was thinking it was a static key is because, all these are the same. If there was a different key, then we'd have different characters here too. So now I wanted to try to figure out how can we get that static key based off of it. One thing to notice that will be important in a second, when you take these first 2 bytes, 67E, and XOR it with 45A, which remember is the header of a Windows executable, the MZ, you get 2024. So just remember. So if it's really using XOR, how can we prove it? In other words, how can we force it to give us the key? One way is we can reverse it. We can look for XOR loops, find the key. But again, it takes time. It's easy to miss, and I'm lazy, so I don't want to go through that step. So based off of that, and based off of how we know XOR works, how can we force it to give us the key? Anyone have any ideas?
Well,
I heard a bunch of stuff. We could search for 2024 in the executable, see if we can find it.
you have the original and the encrypted.
You have it encrypted and originally.
You should be able to compute out the key.
You have the original, right? That would have been a lot easier. You're right. You can take the original, so what they said was basically. Convert those all into bytes, or put this in bytes, and then XOR each byte by itself, and that would actually give you the key out. Somebody else said, look for in the original binary for 2024. I didn't think of that as well, so that would be another valid way to do it. But the way that I thought about doing it was using the software against itself. We know that anything XORed by 0 is itself, so if we feed it a bunch of zeros, it's going to spit out the key to us in theory. So the way that I did this was I created a file that was a little over 4 megabytes of all null characters, all zeros. Fed it through our super duper boson fun program, and out spat out this huge long key. Best thing about it was the first 2 bytes were 2024, so it had actually spit out the key for us. To show you what it did. It actually, when I went in and looked at it, the key, it's the binary. The key that it spat out was a little over, or a little under a megabyte in size. So it's using an XOR key that, which is 1 million bytes or however long that is. So that's a pretty big key. I suspect that what's going on inside the code is that it's trying to randomly generate a key using some seed, but it's actually using a constant seed, and so it always spits out the same key. You might think that this is an amateur mistake, and it is, but I've also seen nation-state malware do the same thing. So this is actually a common mistake by attackers, where they're trying to generate a random key, but they're using a constant seed, and so the same key is always generated. But because we have this huge long key, we can turn to our favorite, or my favorite easy scripting language, Python, and write a quick Python script to take that and decode it. Right? Take it and decode it. And what we get here, so I just wrote this quick Python script, which basically takes one file and XORs it over another file. So we've got, I'll give it my unique key, and then the original file, the encrypted file, and just redirect the outputs to this new file. It takes a second. And the 2 files that we get out are the same size, which is good. It means I didn't mess up with my program. And what's even better, it says now that it's an executable program. So we actually were able to decode it correctly. And in fact, if we would go through and actually execute this, it would actually execute. And then we can start analyzing it. I'll just run it through a hex dump so you can kind of see that what it's showing here. Here's the MZ that I was talking about before. You'll always see MZ up here. About so many bytes in, you'll see PE. Here's this program can be run, so on. And then we can just start doing whatever normal malware analysis you would do. If, let's say we wanted to do strings analysis on this. Go through and just grab out all the strings and look and see what it is. Start seeing some things like debugging strings. So again, this is also not as uncommon as you would think. So now we just need to look over the malware altogether and hey, we found this stealer program. So now we know what it is, it's stealer, and so on. So we're able to decode the original program. This is what the attacker originally meant to send. We just had to do some work for him. That's awesome. All right. So the results of this, everything that we went through, what did we find out? Well, the Crypter claimed that it used RC4. It doesn't. It uses XOR with a really long key. There's a possible backdoor in it. It does say that it will go out and automatically update itself, Well, the fact that they're already lying to us about the encryption that they're using doesn't make me actually believe that they're looking for an update, or that update isn't Trojan, it's something else. So the fact that we're seeing that it's going somewhere was flags me. And if nothing else, you could actually use that domain as an indicator on your network. You know, we were talking before about monitoring your stuff, monitor your network, monitor your DNS servers, monitor your proxy servers to see if anybody's going to that URL or that domain. And if they are, guess what? They have an actual functioning version of this that has compromised one of your systems. And then FUD, is it fully undetectable? Well, yeah, but only because it uses a text file. Nobody was going to detect the malicious text file. Sorry. So, it just turned out that, in my opinion, this is snake oil. We have, on the defensive side of security, we have all these snake oil vendors who promise something and don't deliver or are misleading you. Same thing happens in the bad guy realm, where things are promised for one thing, and you turn around and it's nothing like what it is. But more important is, as we went through this, we went through a number of different steps and techniques to analyze all this. And you can actually use all these different techniques to analyze other things. Everything that I talked about here about decoding the program or decoding that data, you can use on malware that you get that may have encoded strings inside of it. You can use it on network traffic. A lot of malware network traffic just uses XOR encoding. So if you can grab that packet, the data out of that packet, and run it through XOR search, or run it over, you look for patterns, things like that. You may be able to figure out, if it's using XOR, what that key is, or even if it's base64 encoded or something like that. A lot of times you may need to convert it. Initially we had to convert those hex characters to binary. If you ever see anything like that, if you ever see those hex characters like that, first thing you do is convert it to binary. I do a lot of the crypto capture the flag type games online. Inevitably, in every one, you're going to have something like that where you just get a whole bunch of ASCII hex characters. First thing you do, convert it to hex, or convert it to binary and start running XOR search and things like that. We analyze the behavior of the program. We look for expected behavior. We knew what we expected to happen if it was actually using RC4 encryption, and then we analyzed it with API Monitor to see if it was actually using it, and it turned out it wasn't. There are a lot of other programs other than API Monitor which you can use to do this. I mentioned Process Monitor. There's another one called WinAPI Override. And there's a couple more that escape my mind at this point in time. These are all free programs. Get them, download them, test them out, and see how they work and how you can use them in any situation. And finally, use the program against itself. We exploited its suspected weaknesses with using XOR by feeding it a whole bunch of zeros. We could have, as was said, just avoided that by just feeding the two files to each other. And if that fails, try something else. Greg and I were talking earlier, and he said something that I hadn't thought of in a while. Try stuff, and if you fail, that's fine. But just keep trying. Don't stop trying to do things, because in a case like this, you're going to eventually figure it out. It may take you a while to do it, and you may need to ask for help, but you're going to be able to do it. And just try a different technique, come at it at a different from a different aspect. Before I move on to questions, this is going to bug me now until I try it. So here we've got we've got the original binary. It's a decoded one. I want to see what comes out. I think whoever said that is right. We can just put these two together and they'll spit out the key. Yeah, spit out the key. So whoever came up with that idea, that was pretty brilliant. I feel dumb for not thinking about that. But we know this is the key because it starts with the 2024. I'm going to have to remember that next time. So are there any questions, comments?
So how often do you have to do like that deep into it. When you have, I mean, obviously it depends on like if you have a lot coming, like the same piece coming in at a lot. But on average, just out of curiosity, I mean, do you have to spend on like go down the rabbit hole that far on analysis? Very common.
Not too often, because normally it doesn't come in like this. I'll be honest, the only time where, at least in my experience, when I'm doing this in a response or looking at a fish or something like that, where I come across this is usually when I'm trying to break something that the malware is doing. So in other words, a configuration file that it downloads, or a command and control channel is communicating across that's encoded or encrypted somehow, and I want to see into that. That's typically where I'm doing this. A lot of malware now, I showed you strings. Running strings against the program is grab all the embedded strings, which can tell us a lot. Well, malware authors know this, know that we do this, and so they're starting to encode their strings, and they're not using packers because packers kind of set off, they're easy to detect, okay? There's a lot of anomalies within the executable program when a packer is run against it. And because of that, it's easy for antivirus to find packers, and if you find something that's packed, the suspicious level kind of gets raised up a little bit higher. Now, granted, there are legitimate programs that use packers. Adobe's updates come down package format. But you can use these techniques to pull out encoded strings within malware. So a lot of times I'll see strings base 64 encoded or XOR encoded, and then you can use something like XOR to pull those out. Anyone else? Right, well, I've got another t-shirt to give away. So we talked about XOR and how it works. And I mentioned some of the characteristics of it. What happens when you XOR the same character by itself? Zero. I heard it over here. So get zero. There you go. Yep. Anything XORed by itself is zero. Anything XORed by zero is itself. The only other thing I'll say about that is, if you ever look at Windows programs, executables, there's a bunch of places in there which are all zeros. So if you think something an executable has been XOR encoded, look for those patterns in there, because eventually the key is going to come across all those zeros within the executable, and it's going to reveal itself. You can just go through and decode that way. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast or everything made sense, but thank you very much.